All right. Almost happy Halloween.
How are you doing?
I'm
No
good.
one ever asks how you are.
I'm always good.
Good.
All right, so what we're going to look at today is testing. So testing is like automated testing. And so Ember kind of comes with a kind of like a built-in suite, so you don't have to do any configuration or any setup. We can kind of write automated tests to test our application. Now, typically we kind of like, when you're first building an app, you just manually click through to see if it works, but that doesn't really scale if you're making a more complex app and you want to automate that somehow. So how many people have heard of like unit testing? Okay, so it's heard of. So in Ember, there's unit testing, there's testing for components, which is called rendering test, and then there's this higher level type of test called application test, which is much more like visit this page or visit this URL, click on this thing, and do I see this thing on the screen? So there's kind of a variety of different types of tests we can write, and so we're gonna kind of go through a handful of them so you can see them, and they all have different use cases, but this was probably one of my favorite things about Ember, and why it's hard for me to not do anything but Ember, just because the test suite is so good. So so if you want to go ahead and open up the demo that we did, the Ember CRUD one, where we kind of did posts and we did create, edit, update, and delete. Create, read, edit, update, and delete. And so we're going to just write some tests against that first.
Do you know what that's called in the GitHub repo?
Yeah, so if you want to just clone the same one I have, if you don't have it, if you go to class demos and then Ember CRUD.
People start linking the Slack real quick.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, so there's that one. And while you're at it, we're also going to use the same one we did last week. So if you don't have that, you can clone this one as well. So it's going to be two different repos because in the first repo, we actually made a full application. In the second repo, we just did a handful of helpers and components. So it wasn't really an app. So we're going to go through and do the different types of tests for each repo. So the one that I think is the most familiar is trying to replicate your manual testing via automated tests. So we're going to start with the Ember CRUD. And this is very much like click on visit this URL, click on this button, do I see this on the screen? Those kind of types of tests. So it's kind of automating what you're already used to. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open it. So I already have it cloned. Or you can use the one that you already have. Okay, so if you want to run Ember serve on it, okay, so if we visit localhost 4200, we'll see our app. And then once you have the URL up, you can actually visit. I'm going to open up a new tab and then just append on /test at the end. And it's going to run all of the default tests that were already created whenever we manually created files, or sorry, not manually, when we did the Ember generate files and we created all those like components, helpers, routes. It created tests associated with each one of those things that we were generating, and so they kind of have some default tests, and that's what you're kind of seeing right here. There's also some other tests that get run called like ESLint, and this is called linting. So they kind of it verifies your syntax to make sure that you're either following best practices or it's formatted correctly. So if you have errors, it could be because like your indentation is off, or you forgot a semicolon, or you put a space before like the opening parenthesis of a function or something like that. So you can kind of go through them and clean them up. You can also click on disable linting, and if you click on disable linting, it'll just ignore it for now. But this is like kind of another one of those things that makes it great if you're working on teams to kind of ensure everybody's writing code in a cleanly. And so ESLint is like linting the JavaScript files. There's also template lint, so it lints your handlebars files. So making sure that indentation is correct on all your HTML. So it kind of lints both. So I'll disable it for now. And then you can also click on a checkbox that says hide past tests. So if you just want to see just the ones that erred, which is generally what I do because I don't care about the ones that pass. I care mostly about the ones that aren't passing. So I click that checkbox. And then over on the right, you can kind of filter it down based on the thing that you're trying to test. Okay, so we're gonna start off doing what's called application tests, or also called acceptance tests, and those are very much like automating the type of testing that you're doing manually. And so the way we can do this is we can say Ember generate acceptance dash test, and then it's really up to you how you want to kind of break out these tests. In this case, I'm just gonna call it posts. So everything that has to do with posts, like reading posts, creating posts, deleting posts, and editing posts. So I'll just create kind of just one generic test file called posts. No, you can call it whatever you want. Sometimes I call it like, I'll make it separate per thing I'm doing. So I might have one called like view post and viewing post and delete post. It kind of depends on like how complex the app is, because sometimes like as you're writing, this is a pretty simple app, so you can kind of fit it all in one. But if you're doing like sometimes the CRUD apps I'm doing, or like the create is a lot more complicated than like what's here. So it's nice just isolating it to a specific file. So it kind of depends, but it's up to you. Okay, so now if you go to our editor, so I'll open up Atom. And then inside the test folder, there's a folder called acceptance, and then here's our post test. And so so it's sometimes called acceptance test or application test. You'll see both. I think acceptance test has been the wording for a long time, and then recently I think it's been starting to be called application test, but they're essentially the same thing. Okay, so we got a failing test because it says visiting /post. So when we visit this, we're going to check that the URL is /post. And so if we actually look at our app, it's actually just root. So if we change this to visiting / and we assert that the current URL is /, then it should pass. Oh, just navigate to /test. Yeah. Oh, if you want to ignore the template errors, just click on disable linting.
Well, no. Okay, well then.
Oh, if it's like a build error, then yeah, you'll have to fix that.
Promise rejected during visiting post.
Oh, I mean, I still got an error too because there's some other things we have to do. Yeah. Okay, so we're using this kind of new syntax, async await, and this is kind of like a new, relatively new JavaScript feature. So when you're working with promises, if you have some kind of promise, you you call then, and you don't have to type this or anything, but what's inside this callback function gets executed once the promise resolves. And so another way we could say like do something. So another way we can kind of write this one little snippet here is we could say await, or let's change this a little bit. We'll say fetch post. Okay, so another way we can kind of write this snippet is we can say await fetch post, and then assuming this were a fetch post returned a promise that resolved with the list of posts, then we could say let post is equal to await post, and then we could say do something. So this is just kind of like a new syntax, so we don't have to like write .then a lot. So that's
you have to make fetch post async.
Yeah, fetch post would have to be async. Yeah. Yeah. So assuming this is async, and so we're, in this case we're tagging this function with this async keyword because we're saying there's asynchronous behavior going on in here, and whenever something kind of returns a promise, we're going to say await and then just continue on. And so this line won't execute until this resolves. So it kind of helps with it's like cleaner code in a way, just because we don't have like .then all over the place, and it kind of reads linearly, just like synchronous code would, but without having to write all the extra parentheses and callback functions. But I'm going to delete that. So that's what that is. That's just a JavaScript thing. That's not an Ember specific thing. Okay, so let's write a test against this list of posts, and we're going to say, hey, when we visit / or the root URL, let's verify 10 posts are on the page. So we're just checking to make sure there's 10 on the page, so we know it rendered. And if we look at our app, we're getting an error. It says Ember data request, can't make post. It can't make the get request to API/post. So what we need to do is actually import. We need to set up Mirage for our test, so that with our test we're hitting Mirage as well. We want that because we wouldn't want our test to actually hit a real API, because if we hit a real API, if that API goes down, then our test would fail, and we want to be we kind of want to run these isolated and quickly too. So I'm going to, I always forget there's like an import that we have to import from Mirage. But acceptance testing, here we go. So I'll paste it in. There you go. Okay, so we have to import setup Mirage. And then we're going to call setup Mirage inside this module. We're going to pass it this hooks thing. And so this is just kind of like setup to say, let's set up our app with Mirage, or set up our test with Mirage. And so once we get that, then our test pass, and so everything looks good. So when we visit /, we can assert or verify that the current URL is /. Okay, so I'm going to change this test description. I'm going to say visiting / displays a list of posts. Okay, so if we look at the template for the one that displays a list of posts, we can see that each post is being output in an li tag. So what we can do here is we can kind of we can go to our test and we can say assert. There's a library built into Ember called QUnit DOM, and so it kind of makes writing assertions or verifications against the page a little bit easier. So we can say assert DOM, and we want to say let's grab all the LIs, and we can say exists, and we can pass it a count. So we could say I expect there to be 10 of them on the page. Okay, so when we put this, we get our test errors, and so it's saying it can't find li. So let's kind of dig in to see what's going on. So we can actually go to our import at the top where it says Ember test helpers, and there's a helper called pause test. So we can import that, and then in our test we can say await pause test. And this is really helpful for debugging because it'll essentially pause the test, and I can see exactly what it is on the screen, kind of in the little window here. And I can see that there's no posts. So what's going on here? So if you remember from when we kind of set up Mirage and everything, we said inside that Mirage config, we said, or no, let's see, it wasn't config, it was scenarios, the default scenario. We said, let's create a list of 10 posts. So this was like for our development environment when we're just kind of viewing the app. But in our test, it doesn't do this. So we need to set up a different scenario. So what we can do is we can actually just go inside of our test. And I'm going to say server.createList. I want to create 10 posts. And so now that we've created 10 posts for this specific test, we can see that in our pause test, they have been rendered. Okay, so now that's working. I can get rid of the pause test. And if I save, this hopefully will pass. And it passes. And if we were to change this to like 8, so if we only created 8 posts, we could see that it fails and it would say expecting 10, but it only found 8. So we can know that this test is working as we expect. So right now, we kind of wrote an assertion checking the LIs, but imagine we had somebody going through our app doing some styling updates and markup cleanup, and they were changing things, and they changed this to a div tag, right? If they change it to a div tag, our test would break. And so this would make our test brittle, right? Because technically the functionality still works, but because the markup changed, then we'd have to update our test. So you want to kind of find this balance where you don't have to update your test so much, or make your test less coupled to your markup, so that we're verifying the behavior still works, but even if things like styling or markup changes don't necessarily break the test. So what we can do is, a common practice a lot of people do is, instead of targeting things like CSS classes that might change a lot or HTML tags, use an HTML5 data attribute. So we can say something like data test equals post. So if you've never heard of kind of like the data attributes, you can actually create your own custom attributes on HTML elements. You can call it whatever you want. You can say data David or whatever. This allows you just to write custom attributes on your elements. And so a popular one is you could say like data dash test. And so this is just for testing purposes. So if I say data dash test equals post, now I want to say select all elements that have that data test attribute of post inside the test. So the way we can do this is we can adjust our selector, and we can use what's called an attribute selector. And attribute selectors look like this. You say brackets, and you could say data-test equals post. And so you can actually use this attribute selector for all other attributes, not just data attributes. So you could do something like, imagine if you had a bunch of labels on the screen. You could say if the, well, let's see, that wouldn't be, well, okay. You could just say 4 is equal to name, like if you had a label for a name. That would, select the label or the list of labels that have the name attribute. You can get pretty complex with these selectors now. So this way you could say, okay, here's a set of selectors that are only used just for testing. And this way, if somebody makes changes to CSS classes or markup, your test won't break, but your functionality is still, being verified. Any questions? Pretty cool stuff, huh? So I'm going to go to the drop down, and I'm going to say, let's filter it down to just test posts. Not like the other ones were taking a long time, but it'll speed it up. And if I unclick the hide past test, we can see this specific test, so we can see kind of information about it. And it even tells you like how long that test took. You want to kind of ideally keep your test really fast, just because as you're making changes, you want to see, did you break something? I know like I work on an app at work, and it's kind of complex, or it's big, and so right now it takes roughly like 15 minutes, but it's not like, so I don't run the entire thing locally, but I run kind of a subset of the test as I'm making changes, just to see if like I broke that area, and then I run them at the end, sort of thing. Okay, so let's do the one where we let's write a test for the post details page. So I'm going to say test viewing a post details, or let's see, viewing the details of a post. And so this will be an async function that gets the assert. And then I'll create a list. In this case, I'm only going to create one post. Like, I don't need to create 10. Even in this case, I don't really need to create 10, but we'll just leave it. So I'll create a single post. And we can say, let's await visit /post/1. And if we look at the template for the post details, it's inside templates post HBS. We can see there's an H1 and P. And so, like I mentioned before, we don't want to assert against these raw tags in case they happen to change. These are more likely to change than other things. So let's add some data test attributes to this. So I'll call this post title. I'll say data test is equal to post body. And then we can go back to our test, and we can say assert DOM data test is equal to post title. And then there's so once we've grabbed this element, we can say there's a method called hasText. And I'll just leave it blank for now. And so we could say the title is post 1. And then we could do the same for the post body. So I'll say assert DOM data test is equal to post body has text. I'll leave that blank. And if I save it, we're going to see that we get a bunch of like lorem ipsum text. And I believe this, I think this is random. So let me, let's run it again. Okay, so if we look at the test, every single time we run it, it is random. So how do we test with this random stuff? So what I like to do is I can actually just make this hard-coded so that it's obvious. So what I'm going to do here is instead of saying create list, I'm just going to say create, which allows us just to create one thing instead of a list of things. And then we can pass in an object. And here I can say the body is something like my post body. And for the title, we'll say post 1. And then in our assertion, we could just say it's equal to my post body. So in our test, we don't really want so much unpredictability or that randomization because that just makes testing hard. So if you want, generally I like to keep things more static and fixed. So I'll do this where I create kind of post with static data so that I can assert against those values. Yes?
If you're testing the things that you create within the test, then how does that help you test things like outside of it? Like,
outside of the...
How does the stuff that you're writing in here connect to the things that like in the template?
Oh, in the template? So if I were to say like await pause test, and we see it, we can see that because we created that post with the static data, that was the same stuff that was rendered in the template.
Oh.
Yeah, because we're basically kind of telling Mirage, create one post with these values instead of, if we kind of look at our Mirage factory, we can see that it's random, right? Faker, lorem, sentence. So because it's random, you know, it makes it a little bit harder to test. So if we just say, let's fix it, so it's always this, then we can assert that in our test.
Got it. And then when it like loads the page itself, it won't load that stuff. It'll like clear it out.
Oh yeah, this scenario where we're creating this data, this is just for testing. So like in our actual app, if we go over here, it's all the same stuff. Like that same scenario where it's randomized and everything, it's not the same stuff. It's like just for the test scenario.
Got it. And it'll like delete it, re-render it.
Yeah. So it's never like stored anywhere. It's just kind of telling Mirage, hey, use it just for the test.
Okay, got it. It's like using the template and filling in your own data.
Exactly.
Testing the template.
Yep. Okay, so let's do it where we write a post. So I'll say test, and we'll call this test writing a post. So this will be an async function that gets the assert. And so if we look at our app over here, if we see this write a post link, so we can say, let's visit post/new, fill out this information, click that publish button, and then once that happens, let's kind of like go through it again. Hit publish. We're on post/11, so like the details page for the post, and then we see that data. So we can kind of, so we can write a test that kind of verifies all of that.
Can you do everything in this test suite that you can do with Selenium?
Yeah, it's so this test suite kind of knows a little bit more knowledge about Ember, and that's why it's so fast. Versus if you tried Selenium, it's like it's slower because it's actually popping being kind of a browser, whereas this is kind of it's running in this little window that's sort of like a browser. So yeah, so I like at work I write all these kinds of tests to at least verify things are working against Mirage, and then we actually have a QA team that writes Selenium tests that actually verify when the app integrates with the real APIs. So it's like 2 layers. Yeah. But these do run a lot faster than Selenium, whereas, yeah, if you had to do this all in Selenium, it would take, no, in my opinion, a lot longer.
Selenium sucks.
Okay, so writing a post, we could say, let's await visit post/new. We're going to visit that URL. And then we want to fill in these values. So we kind of looked at helpers like visit and pause test. So there's another one we can import, and it's called fill in. And And this is for basically filling in inputs and text areas. So I'll import fill in. And so I'm going to say await fill in. And so right here it's an input. And if we look at the template for the create template, it's kind of an Ember input. So right now you can't really add data test attributes to these things. So what we can do is just add an ID. And so we can just leverage this title. There are ways to add it, but it's kind of more than I want to get into. So for now, I think the ID is unique enough. So I think, so we can add an ID to the text area as well. So we could say ID is equal to the body. So we'll fill out the title and the body and then click on publish. And so this button, it doesn't have like the data test attribute. So we could say data test is equal to publish. We'll just call this like, we'll just say publish. Okay, so we'll say, let's fill in the title. We'll say something like intro to testing. And we could say await fill in. And then the text area had the ID of body. So we can say, I love testing. And then we need to click on that publish button. So there's another helper we can import. So we could say like await click. And then that data test is equal to publish. But we didn't import this click helper. So we can go to the top and import this. So we imported visit, fill in, and then we'll also import click. And there's a lot of different helpers that I pointed to in the documentation on the class page. So you can see things like click, fill in. I think there's like mouse over, mouse up, keystrokes, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so once we click on that publish button, we can say assert.equal, and then kind of like before, we can get the current URL through this current URL function, and we can say we expect that to be /post/1, and it's 1 because we haven't, in our test, we haven't said start off with a list of posts already. It's kind of empty, so we're creating our first post. Yes.
Can you like put a bunch of characters?
Yeah.
into your text at the top?
There you go. Okay, so if I save this, oh, it jumps. All right, here's what I'm gonna do. I'll put these in like a different order just so it's always at the top. So I'll go up. Okay, so let's kind of go back. Okay, and so we should see, let's see, writing a post. Here we go. It's the first one. So if I were to kind of change this and just give it a wrong selector, if I just miss typo, we can see element not found when calling fill in title F. So it'll tell you if you have like maybe you couldn't find that specific element. Okay, so let's also assert a couple other things on the page. So we could say assert.equal, or sorry, we'll say assert.dom. And because we're on the edit page, we can kind of copy what we did down here. So we'll just grab the same assertions for the viewing a post details, and we'll just kind of assert it again to make sure, when we create it, we still see the same thing. So in this case, the has text, we'll say intro to testing. And I love testing. And if we expand the test, we can see that each of these assertions or verifications will run. Any questions? Yeah.
What was the difference between equal and dom?
Yeah, so assert DOM is for when we kind of want to check things on the page. So we want to kind of say like document, find this element, and then verify the inner text says this thing. Whereas assert equal is just saying it's comparing two things. So it's like it's kind of like a double equal. Like does one double equal one, or this string double equal another string?
Okay, and then dom is what? Is it
It's like page related.
page related?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in this case, like this current URL one, this returns a string of the current URL. And so we're just saying, hey, is the current URL equal to just slash? There's no like thing on the page we're checking here.
Mhm.
It was just kind of like the functions they came up with in the in QUnit, which is the testing library here. Okay, so let's do deleting a post. So this one's a little trickier. So we go here, let's go to home. And if I look at these and I click on delete, we're gonna get this window here that says, you know, this confirmation. So if I hit cancel, it doesn't delete, but if I hit OK, then it deletes. So let's test both of those scenarios. So I'm gonna say test deleting a post. So it's an async function. So what we can do here is we could just say, we'll just create a list of 1. And we'll say await visit / when we visit the home page. Then we're going to click on that delete button. So we'll say await click. And I don't think we gave that delete button a data test attribute. So if we look at it, it's just a plain button. So we can go in here and we could say data test is equal to, we'll call it delete dash post. I'll kind of break these out onto multiple lines here.
What about the post tests?
Yep. So we added that data test attribute, and so we could say when we click on data test is equal to delete post, then here we need to essentially say click on confirm OK. I'm just leaving that as a comment because so with these types of tests, we can't actually click on native browser alerts or confirmations or confirm boxes. And so there's another way we can deal with this, but I'll kind of write through the test and then we'll get to this point. And so at the end, we'll say assert DOM. And the same thing that we did when we kind of verified how many were in the list, we said, we'll just copy this statement. So we're saying how many posts were on there. Well, if we start with 1 and then we delete it, then we'll end up with 0. So we could say account 0. Okay, so if I save this right now and we look at our test suite one, we can see that we get the confirmation box. So if I hit OK here, then everything passes. But we don't want to have to do that, right? Because we want this more automated, so it just does it by itself. So things like alert and confirm, we can't automate in these types of tests. There's other types of tests, like you mentioned, the Selenium stuff, which you can actually click through, but in these Ember tests, we can't. And so, so what we can actually do is we could say, let's just assume window.confirm returns true, and then we can verify it. And the way we do this is through kind of is what's known as a mock. And so we can kind of fake out the window object, and we'll just kind of fake out the confirm function and say, hey, if it returns true, so meaning that somebody clicked on that OK button, then this should happen. Then we can write another test that says if they hit cancel or assume they hit cancel, then verify that nothing was deleted. And so how do we kind of fake out the window? So there's a nice add-on that kind of helps with this, and it's called Ember Window Mock. And it's kind of like a replacement window just for testing purposes. Oh, that's weird. What's going on here? Okay, well, all right, so we have to go back to our terminal. We're going to stop Ember serve for a minute. And we're going to say Ember install ember-window-mock. Okay, so go ahead and, so once you've installed this add-on, just rerun Ember serve. So every time you install these add-ons, you do have to kind of restart the Ember serve. So I'll paste this inside the Slack. Oh yeah, so when I reran Ember serve, we got like a linting error. So yeah, again, these errors you'll probably see too. You can ignore them for now. You want to clean them up eventually, but it won't break your app. Okay, so how does this thing work? So the point where we use that window, where we say when we try and delete a post, we say window.confirm. And so instead of relying on the global window, we're going to say import window from Ember window mock. So we're importing kind of like a custom one. So when it actually runs, then it just defaults to the actual global window variable. But then in test, it gets overridden so that we can do custom things with it. Okay, so just add this to your controller. Then we can go back to our test, and we're going to import a couple more things. So we're going to say import window, comma, and then something called reset, and we'll say from Ember window mock. And I'll get to this reset in a minute. But so now that we imported window into our test, we can go to our test, and instead of actually like so try and instead of clicking on confirm, which we can't really do, we can say window.confirm is equal to a function that just returns true. So if we look at our, so window.confirm, it's kind of this blocking modal, and it returns either true or false depending on if you click OK or cancel. So assuming we click OK, then window.confirm would return true. So we could say, here's a function that returns true. This is kind of like, I guess, the newer way of doing it. You could also write it like regular functions, say return true. Same thing. But if I save this now and go back to our tests, let's see, deleting a post. Oh, okay, let's see. Hold on a sec. Oh, sorry. Okay. It's because I did it afterwards. Okay, so after we kind of want to do this up in the kind of more setup phase. So in the beginning, we set it up, and then once we click it, because if I had it down here, then I'm saying after I click it, it's too late to override window.confirm. So we want to do that kind of from the beginning of our test, and then once we run through it, this should fix it. So if I go and change this, all right, so all is good. So I can actually change this back to 1, and then change this back to 0, and all is good. I'll change this back. So ideally, we don't want to have to, like our high-level test, to rely too much on the implementation details of how we did this. But in this case, because window confirm is blocking and we don't really have control over it, we can kind of mock it out or fake it out and say, assuming it returns true, then we can verify all these other things. Okay, so I'm going to test the other part, which is what happens if we click false on that confirm. So if window confirm returns false, then we should see the same number of posts and none of them getting deleted. So I'm going to copy this test, and I'm going to say window.confirm is false. And then the count should still be 1 because we didn't delete anything. And then let's actually rename this description. So we could say like canceling, deleting a post. Okay, so I imported this reset function from Ember window mock, and so each time we do this, okay, so we could actually say, so there's this hook called after each, and this will run after every single test. And so if I just do like a console log on window, and let's see. Oh, it's not that. Okay, so in each of these tests, we're modifying window, and in theory, we could modify window here. And if this other test relies on window in a slightly different way, then or relies on it from like its default behavior, then we could like one test could actually break this other test because it's sharing this window variable, right? And because this one modified window in one case, and maybe this one relied on it on like the default behavior, so you can get some into some weird scenarios and tests starting to fail because one test expects window to behave as normal, and we modified it in another test. And so it's just good practice to kind of reset that mock or this window after every single test so that each of these tests receive window in its native unmodified state. So in this case, it didn't really matter, but you know, if you imagine like you start writing properties on window and then this one gets it and it's not what it expected, kind of the default, then it didn't do the cleanup. So we need to kind of just essentially just do the cleanup after every single test. So window's always fresh and new with every test run. Okay, so if we go back to our app and just do disable linting or uncheck that, and I'll just run everything. So if I uncheck acceptance post and click apply, and it looks like almost everything's passing. We have a couple of linting errors, so let's kind of fix these. Pause test is defined but never used, so it doesn't like to keep around pause test if you're not using it, so unused import. So if we delete this, I'll hide past tests. And we have one more, which is index.js, incorrect indentation of close bracket. So if we go to index.js, and it says line 11, which is this. Okay, line 11, column 44. I wonder what it's expecting. This maybe. Not sure I like that, but I'm sure if we put it all in one line, it works fine. Incorrect indentation of HTML attribute type. All right, well, let's just go back to what it was before so we get it passing. Okay, so we got kind of all our tests passing. So I'm going to make a commit. So I'll say git add all. Oh, there's all these idea files. Hold on, let's see. Git reset. All right, so I'm gonna. The idea files were from my web storm when I opened this a while ago. So I'm gonna go to git ignore and just type in idea, so it ignores it. So you probably don't have this, but git status. Okay, so now it's just the new files. I'll git add all. Git add all, git status, git commit, adds acceptance text. Okay, so we're done with our test, but all right, so let's integrate, instead of hopping to the next set of tests, let's integrate something called Travis CI. And so when you're working on a team, it's nice to have kind of remote verification that all the tests are passing. So somebody could say like they ran the test, it works, but maybe it only worked on their machine, or maybe they're lying or whatever. But it's nice just to have like, I want to know like the tests are always passing, right? So whenever somebody commits and pushes it up to GitHub, they're always pushing code that has passing tests. None of them are broken. And so we can have this remote verification through a service, through what's known as a continuous integration service. And so continuous integration is kind of like the process of running your tests on a remote server. So every time somebody makes a commit, these tests are run, and you can't merge your code into the repository unless the tests pass. So it makes sure, it verifies that every single piece of code that's pushed up has passing tests, and nothing broken ever gets put in. And so Travis is kind of one service that is one CI service. It has a free plan which we'll use, and you'll probably see it kind of all over the place. Like if you ever go to Ember.js GitHub, and we look at their GitHub, and if I click on one of these repositories, have you ever seen these badges on GitHub repos? This is essentially Travis, where it's saying the build is passing. So all the tests are currently passing right now. If you ever see it red, it means somehow some bad tests got in and it started to fail. So let's add one of these badges to our repo. So this is also kind of one of the project requirements. All right, so if you just Google for Travis CI and then click on this link, so I'll paste this one in here in the Slack. And so I'm going to say sign in with GitHub. And yours might be empty. I have a bunch of other stuff going on, so. And then right here, there's a plus sign for adding a repository. And then all the stuff I push up is in this organization called ITP. So if I click on this, okay, and I think it's called Ember CRUD. Whoops, I spelled that wrong. Let's see, let me double check this. Oh, ITP for, let's see, what is this? Fall 20, oh, it's a different one. Let me go back. Okay, you guys probably won't have to do this because I put mine in like a separate organization, but let me, what's my password? Okay. All right, let me see if I got a verification email. All right, let's pause on this. Maybe it takes time for this thing to sync, but we'll move on to the next repo, and then we'll do the other types of tests, and we'll come back to this. Okay, so I'm going to just minimize that one. And so I posted the other repository in the Slack, so the second one. So we just did application tests. So these are very like high level, pretty much automating what we're already doing when we manually click around. Now we're going to dive in and look something that's a little bit closer to unit tests. They call them rendering tests because we're rendering individual helpers and components. And so we're going to test like the components and helpers work as expected. So I know most of you said you've heard of unit tests. Ember also has unit tests, but in most of our apps, like the majority of tests I think that people write end up being like these rendering component types of tests or these high-level application tests. A lot of time there's I sometimes still write unit tests, but there's very few times like if I have a utility function or maybe like some very specific like model function, then I'll write a unit test. But for the most part, like there are a lot of components or I'm testing like the whole application. It's kind of like these are the majority types of tests that I think people write. Okay, so I'm going to cd into that repo. So it's school 404, and then it's cd into helpers and components. And I'll check out master, which is what's pushed up. And make sure you stop your Ember serve from your other, from the one we were just doing. And then we'll run Ember serve on this one. And then let's go ahead and open that up in Atom. Okay, so if we visit just 4200, so it was kind of this app where we just displayed a bunch of components and stuff on the screen. And then let's also do the other one where it was just all the tests. And this one will probably have more failing ones. Okay, so let's do the characters remaining one. I think that's a good one. So if you just as a refresher, if we look at this component, it was this piece of text right here. So if I type in stuff in here, it turns red when it's less than 0, and then it's also and it counts down with every character we type based on the max number of characters that we said were allowed. So something you might see under like an input. Okay, so if we go to tests, and then under integration, so you kind of notice that there's a few folders here. We created, in the last repo, we created a folder called acceptance, which were the application tests. Then there's the unit, which we're not really looking at right now. And then integration, which is like the rendering types of tests, so components and helpers. So let's open up characters remaining. So we don't have to generate any tests because this one got generated with every, or these tests get generated with every single Ember.G component that we do. All right, so if we look at the application HBS, and we look at usage of this characters remaining, let's test. So we had a few different usages. We had this usage where we don't pass in anything custom in between the tags, which was called the block. And and this one just kind of leverages some default text that the component provides. So let's test it this way first. So I'm actually just going to copy this instance of it, and then I'm going to delete these comments, and then inside this render, I'm just going to copy and paste that component, and then I can actually just delete this. And then we actually don't need this class equals my class, so it's not relevant. So get rid of it. Okay, so let's we'll name this test on initial render. So let's test this component like when it first renders, and assuming the name, we'll set the name as ITP. So if the max is 10 and then we initially set the name, then we should see, so we can say assert.dom, and we kind of get rid of this. And, oh, sorry, I was just, let me go back. All right, so I'm going to break this out. And we're going to, let's give this a data test attribute. So we're just going to give it just for the sake of the test. So we'll say data test is equal to characters remaining. So we'll say assert.dom data test is equal to characters remaining. And we're going to assert that it has text. It should say something like, I think it's 7 characters remaining. So we're testing this component on initial render. We're setting it up and saying, hey, when the name is ITP, the max is 10, let's look for this element and assert that the text is right.
Wait, did you delete the other await render?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I deleted the other one.
Okay.
Yeah. Like by default, when you generate a component, like all that stuff passes, but because we modified it, it didn't pass, so I just deleted it. Yeah, so just one set, await, let's see, this dot render, or just render, and then the one assertion.
And I know assert dot equal to
Yeah, so I got rid of that too. So we're asserting against the DOM that this has this text. And let me move this over. Then we'll go to the tests. Now I'm going to filter this down so that we're only testing characters remaining. And we can see that it's passing. So if I were to go here and actually just change this text to more than a few characters, we can see that it's no longer accurate. So usually I like to see at least like it fail once before assuming it works. I'm actually going to just make this a tad shorter so it's all on one screen. All right, that way it's, yeah, you guys can see both. Okay, so let's write another test. So I'm going to copy this one because it's going to be kind of similar. And instead of being on initial render, I'm going to say when the text changes after render. So that would mean I have some text, the component renders, and then the text would change afterwards. And this would be something like, well, for example, in our application, if somebody types in character, so like initially when the page loads, this component renders, but then people type into the input, and so this text value changes. So then it so the number of like the phrasing changes. So let's kind of test that scenario. So we're going to say this dot set. So maybe initially we start with like I. Or no, let's do this. Let's do ITP, and we'll say afterwards we change it to ITP 404. So in this case, it should be, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 3 characters remaining. Oh, let's see. This dot set name to ITP 404. So this is like so this is just kind of just testing another aspect of this, and so usually like if we go to the characters remaining component, and we kind of know what this functionality is based off of. It's this computed property that is kind of recalculated every time this key text changes. So if I actually go here and get rid of this and then save it, we're going to see our test fail. And it's because this isn't recomputing every single time. So we're essentially testing that this computed property is dependent on text changing. Oops. Okay, so we tested 2 parts of it. Now I'm going to open up both files and let you look at it for a minute. Okay, so if you look at these 2 files, do you think there's anything in here that we haven't tested? Yeah.
Changing the class name.
Yeah. Checking to see it's red, right? Yep, so that's one. Anything else? Yep.
If it has the has block.
Yeah, if it has the block too, right? Because we use it in 2 scenarios here. Yeah, so we pass it either something custom, so it's used in this one way, and then it's used this other way. So yeah, I'd say there's 2 more things that we could probably test here. Let's go ahead and do those. So ideally, like when you're doing these components, you want to try and test like every angle of it, so that it's well covered, and if you make changes, if you broke something or not. Like if you made a change and you didn't have high test coverage on this component, then you could easily break something, and so you want to try and prevent that. So ideally, you want to have lots of test coverage that covers kind of most of the scenarios for the component. Okay, so we have one on initial render, and then when the text changes. I'm going to copy this one test and paste it up here, and we'll say when the text is greater or is longer than the max number of characters. So in this case, we could say maybe let's just decrease the max and say, Actually, let me see how this component works again. We go to the app and we type in here. Okay, so it's black when it's 0, but then once it goes less than 0, it turns red. So we'll say the name is ITP404, and we'll just say the max is 3. So here we could say, well, when the text is too long, it has a class of error. So here we could say has, instead of has text, there's another one called has class. And we can say has class error. And if we go to our test, we can see it passing. And if you want to like actually visually see these components, you can use that same pause test helper here. So if I say import pause test, and then right here I'll say await pause test, we can see that it is red for this one instance, and so it's working as expected, so I can delete it. So really good for debugging. Any questions? All right, so I'll let you guys do the last one, and then we'll do it in like 5-10 minutes. So the one for testing it when the component has a block, which is testing this scenario. So yeah, go ahead and take like 10 minutes, and then we'll kind of reconvene. Okay, so this one, testing if there's a block, we can kind of treat it kind of like this other one here. So I'm just going to copy one of these other tests. That's typing. So I'll paste it, and then I'll go to the application HBS and just copy this usage of it. So just change this to that. And okay, so if name is ITP and the max is also 10, and so I want to assert that like what's inside here is 7 characters remaining. So I can actually just assert that the P tag. And this time I think the tag is okay because this tag is really only in this test. It's not like a P tag exists inside the characters remaining. But so we can say assert that the P tag has text, and we'll say characters remaining colon and then the value. So we'll change this. So we're kind of we're verifying that this custom block is the rendered text and not the default one without the block. And so it looks like it's okay. So if I actually go in here and just change maybe like add a character to name, we can see it fail once, so characters remaining 6. So just good practice, like make sure that you see it fail at least once. I'll go back and change this, and then I'll also change the description to say we'll test the component in block form. So block form meaning we pass something between the tags. Okay, so kind of running a little long, but I was going to show you how to do the testing helpers, but I'll let you, I'll at least get you started so you guys can try it, because if you want to do it for your project. If you want to generate, well, actually I think it already comes with a helper test. Let's see, tests, components, helpers. Okay, so this is like the default one for that with commas. Same deal, we just kind of take how we're going to use it, pass in some value, and write an assertion against it. So pretty similar. But we've covered quickly looked at helper test, component test, and application test. And I think those are kind of like the majority of tests that you'll probably write for an application. You might have unit tests here and there for like little utility functions, or maybe some like custom logic, like domain specific logic in a model or something. I'll usually have those too, but I'd say the majority of my tests are kind of in this like component and application realm. Okay, so now I'm going to close this. I'm going to stop Ember server. I'm going to go back to the other app. So let's kind of close all this. Okay, so I'm going to add it to my Ember CRUD repo. So we're going to add a little badge on the README. So if you kind of go back to Travis, and we'll do this again. So if I just delete the path, you can say add repository, and a list of repositories should show up here so you can search for it. Or first you actually want to create this repository on GitHub. So I already have it on GitHub, but if not, you'll want to create it for yours. And mine's kind of under an organization, so the ITP 404 fall 2018. So I'm going to click on here. And so here's my Ember CRUD. So I'm just going to turn this on. So you can just watch. You don't have to like follow along because you could watch it later in this video recording. But I turned it on. So now if I click on settings for Ember CRUD, there's some configurations here. So we could say, let's see. Okay, so if you click on the badge here, you can actually copy this little badge, and it should say like passing or failing. And so I'm going to copy the markdown, which is what we're going to paste inside the README. So if I paste this and go back to my repo and close all this, and I'm going to go to the README. And generally people will just put it at the top, so you just paste this little piece of markdown here, and this will be the badge image. So I'll say git status, git add all, git commit. We'll say add Travis CI badge, and we'll push this up. And because we turned it on, now Travis should run these tests. Okay, so once I pushed it up, because I turned it on, we can see that now it is running. And so this will kind of take a little bit because there's a file in every Ember project called Travis YAML, this YML, and it's kind of like the configuration file for Travis. And it'll do, there's like configuration saying it's running on Node because Ember CLI runs on Node. It's going to use Chrome to run the tests. So some other things here. In the end, it's running npm test, which behind the scenes, if we kind of, if we look at package.json, we can see inside this test command, it's behind the scenes, it's running this Ember test command, which is similar to us what we did when we visited the /test URL. And so you can actually just watch it kind of run here. And so this is running in what's called headless Chrome. Chrome, where it doesn't pop open a window, it's just running kind of without the UI. And so that's why they call it headless. But it's running in real Chrome just without the UI. And so you kind of, we can wait around for this, but if we go back to the repo and refresh, so it says build on Node because it's running for the first time. And once it passes, then it should turn green since everything I think was passing when we pushed it up. Now I mentioned these tests are nice, especially when you're working on a team, so you want to prevent people committing to like the main branch and committing code that doesn't work. So what you can actually do, and this is kind of like what we do at work too, is inside settings, there's a branches tab in GitHub, and the main branch is master, and we can add rules to this. And we could say like require what's called a pull request. So we can't push directly onto master. We have to go through like this review process, and those are called pull requests. So we can say require pull request before merging, so somebody has to like review it and approve it through GitHub. That's kind of one option. We could also say require status checks, and so one of these status checks could be running Travis CI. So we could click this. So this way we could essentially say nobody can push to the master branch at all. You have to go through this like pull request review. Once the pull request passes all the Travis CI test, then we're allowed to merge it. So it's kind of like extra security, making sure that master branch stays free from maybe accidental commits that have bad tests or something. So generally, like this is what we'd probably do. So we'll say, so maybe I'll just say create. Oh, name can't be blank. So we'll say apply rule to, we'll call this test must pass. What if I just call this? Oh, I think we just type in the branch name, so master. So I'll just say create. Okay, so if we go back to Travis, we see that it's green, so everything passed. So it didn't take too long. This is kind of a small app. But if we go back to here and refresh, you might actually have to do like a hard refresh. Yeah, and then build passing. So now what we can do is, let me go back to my app, and I'm just gonna make like one small change. I'm just gonna say CRUD. So just like change the capitalization here. Now if I go back here and I say git add all, let me git add all. Oh. And then I say git okay, so now kind of like the new process that I should follow would be, let's create a separate branch. So I'm not going to push directly on master. I'm going to say git checkout -b. I'll call this like update readme. And so I'm on this new branch. And so I can, I'll make a commit and I'll say changed title on the readme. So now when I git push origin master, I'm going to push this up to kind of prevent pushing directly on master. Oh wait, sorry, wasn't supposed to, well, I don't think it let me anyways. Git push origin update readme. So I'm pushing up to a new branch on GitHub called the same thing. And so now when I go here, you can see it's saying update readme, cool. So I'm going to say compare. So this is me kind of creating that pull request. So I'm going to say create pull request. And so it's running these Travis tests. And once they pass, then there will be kind of like a green button that says now you can merge it into master. But we've essentially protected that master branch, so you can't push directly to it. And yeah, so not like you'll probably do this for your own projects, but it was more just FYI, just because like it kind of goes hand in hand with all this testing stuff. And if you ever did kind of do this, you know, internship or whatever, you might see this. This is a pretty common process. So we can see kind of it's go back to here, it's getting triggered, so it's running, and at some point we'll be able to merge it. I don't think this broke anything because we just changed the README, but we do have to go through this like approval process.
What was the GitHub thing? Terminal?
This one?
Push.
Oh, git push origin readme, because I created a different branch locally called that. Cool. Any questions? So this was already on the final project requirements, but so adding the Travis CI badge, making sure all your tests pass, and so at least to go over it, so you're gonna have like 5 application tests that cover all your CRUD type of operations. So up here you have at least 1 get, 1 post, 1 putter patch, and 1 delete. So you'll probably have at least 1 for each. So testing kind of those main scenarios. for the application or acceptance type of test, and then you'll have 5 rendering tests, which is components and or helpers, just like a mixture of both. Okay, so it's almost done. Well, you don't have to wait for it. So I guess, let's see. Let's go over the homework. So this is the last assignment. There'll be a couple labs still, but last assignment. So you're going to write just a handful of tests. So one for that truncate text help, the truncate text helper on the Gmail app. One for the star button component. I kind of wrote out like the description for each test. So each bullet point or top level bullet point essentially corresponds to a test. So you'll have a test that for each one of these. And then sometimes for each bullet, I put like a sub bullet. This is more of just extra information just to, we never went over this, so I might have to modify this a bit. All right, I might actually delete this one because we didn't cover it. All right, and then I think I have to also delete this piece. But other than that, everything else is cool. And then add Travis CI, and that should, yeah. Okay, so it passed. Now if we go back to this pull request, it says, okay, now we can merge this in. So if I click merge, confirm merge, this goes into master. I can delete the branch because I don't need this on GitHub anymore. And now if we look at the master branch, we can see we updated like a few minutes ago. So let's see, readme. Updated 5 minutes ago. So that's kind of like the whole cycle that you'll probably see, at least in a lot of companies for the pull request and tests and all that. All right. Any questions? Cool. And for today.